Hello, everyone, and welcome to Through Time and Clades. My name's Joan,
And I'm Albert.
and we are back for a new installment of our nature news. We're going to be covering stories from February 2022, and oh my gosh, we have been busy lately.
Mm-hmm.
We've been working on the website slowly but surely, um, and we've been getting lots of nice updates about our channel itself. Um, my little human evolution in 30 minutes video has been doing remarkably well,
Mm-hmm.
and I appreciate all of the productive feedback that I've gotten there. And it's looking like it's been introducing lots of new viewers to our channel. So if you're new, welcome, welcome. Um, it looks like we're about to hit the 800 subs mark, so that's kind of cool. It's like, wow, we're climbing on up there for sure. Oh gosh. But Albert, how have things been on your end?
Ooh, yeah, I guess I've definitely been quite busy. But first of all, yes, you did an excellent job with the video. I really enjoyed it. And I think if anybody is wondering whether we're going to do like a short video like that, kind of summarizing Dinosaurs, the second chapter, the plan is yes. It won't be released immediately. We won't get around to it like in the immediate future, but yeah, I think eventually we'll probably make something like that because it seems like a good idea. Um, and yeah, as for what I've been up to, obviously there are you know quite a lot of things to pay attention to in recent times. Things going on in the world. However, in the meantime, I've still just kind of been trying to plug away at all the different projects that I've been working on. Like you said, slowly but surely. Um, so the website, it is, yeah, I've definitely been making some progress on that. It is slow progress because again, we do this in our spare time and uh, we don't have a whole lot of it. But I'm really liking how it's coming together, and I'm always excited to continue working on it. So, yeah, one of these days it's going to get done. We just have to keep working on it. So that's coming along. Let me think. Research wise, I'm still working on stuff. Yeah, basically what I've been working on all along. Still kind of plugging away at that. I guess a sort of benchmark that's about to happen pretty soon is that I'm about to have my Viva, which is also known as a thesis defense in some parts of the world, um, very soon, like within less than 2 weeks as of the time of recording. We're planning to have my Viva, and yeah, once I pass that, that's essentially the final hurdle in my PhD. I mean, of course, it's not like strictly the very last thing because it's possible that my examiners will request that I make some changes to the thesis and I'll have to implement those. But in general, the kind of custom is that once you've passed your viva, once you're kind of had defended your thesis to the satisfaction of your examiners in like this potentially several hour long conversation with them, you've basically gotten your PhD. So yeah, that's definitely exciting, which means that certainly by the next time we have our next news episode, maybe not necessarily our next episode in general, but our next news episode for next month, um, I will probably, I will probably have a claim to being called Dr. Albertonicus, which is, yeah, wow. So I'll certainly update everybody on that in the next episode, when that comes to pass. Um, and yeah, what else? Right. So I guess something else that is kind of worth mentioning here um, is that a book, a new book, or sort of new, a new book that's very relevant to my field came out in the last month or so. So technically, it is a second edition of an existing book, but it's a kind of much welcomed one. So this is the second edition of Gerald Meyer's book, Paleogene Fossil Birds, which is you know, essentially the only reference book on that subject that is currently available. Um, uh, so it is quite an important book for those of us who work on like fossil birds. Um, and Gerald Meyer is basically one of the leading experts on the subject of Paleogene fossil birds, and uh, he has described like numerous species of these fossil birds, and so there is hardly anyone who is as qualified to write the book than he is. And the first edition of this book, and if you followed Dinosaurs, the second chapter, you probably or at least you might remember me mentioning this book as like kind of one of the main references that I use while preparing that series. And the first edition of that book came out in 2009. So, yeah, more than 10 years ago. And we found out a lot of new things about bird evolution and kind of made a lot of new fossil discoveries in the meantime, a lot of them by Gerald Meyer himself. And so, yeah, it was really kind of high time for a new edition of that book. So I think it's a great thing that we finally have this new edition updated with all this new information. And overall, it looks very good. This time there are some various upgrades, like the most of the images, most of the figures in the book of these fossil bird specimens are in color, unlike the black and white ones of the last edition. And furthermore, I was surprised at like how much like undescribed material was figured in this book. Like a lot of the specimens that are shown in this book are like specimens that haven't yet been properly described in scientific literature, but Gerald is like, okay, well, these specimens exist and they're probably pretty important, but someone has to work on them. Which it's probably going to be him because I know he's already like published on some of the important specimens from that particular locality and from that particular collection. So yeah, we're gonna see a lot of exciting new fossil birds coming out in the coming months and years. I'm expecting, and as it happens, some of my papers are cited in the book because, of course, I've written a few papers now on the subject of bird evolution, and some of them are relevant to these paleogene birds. And certainly, Dr. Gerald Meyer does not agree with my conclusions in all cases. So in some parts of the book, he is critical of my some of my interpretations, but that's how science works, and in certainly at least in some of his arguments, I think are fairly justified. I'm not like super attached to some of those interpretations anyway. So, yeah, no, I think it's good to have kind of a response to to your work because that's how what other people in the field think about it, and they might raise some points that you either have considered but didn't favor at the time, or you hadn't considered previously. So yeah, certainly. There are things in the book that I don't necessarily agree with, but overall, it's certainly a much needed addition to the literature that's available, and obviously, as I mentioned, books on fossil birds, especially Cenozoic fossil birds, are very sparse, and so yeah, definitely an important work, and probably a reference that I'll be turning to very often in the near future. So that's kind of an important thing I read on the side, on top of doing research and working on the website and various other things. But in other kind of media related news, there is certainly another piece of media that has really garnered our interest, I think. So we finally received some news about a long-awaited film related to paleontology within the past month or so, and we're really excited to talk about it, aren't we?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, the hype has been real.
Yep.
A bunch of people have been talking about it. Um, oh, it's it's exciting. It's really
Yeah.
exciting.
So I'm sure anyone who is familiar with paleontology related films can probably guess what we are talking about. So do you want to reveal what it is?
Yeah, of course, we are talking about the new episode of the Dinosaurius series. Yeah, so that came out last month. Of course, the Dinosaurius series is a collection of independently made short films by David James Armsby
Hmm.
of Dead Sound, a YouTube channel. And this particular episode is called Sea and Sky. So, of course, anybody who's interested in dinosaurs knows that there were other types of reptiles and other organisms that existed during the Mesozoic
Hmm.
era. And oftentimes in popular culture, they're mistaken for dinosaurs.
Right.
Of course, we now know, like, if you go through the evolutionary history of these groups, they're not true dinosaurs. They're not, in most cases, not even particularly closely related to
Hmm.
dinosaurs. But, you know, there's a scientific definition of dinosaur and there's a sort of a colloquial definition of dinosaur. And a lot of these animals are fairly dinosaur-ish enough that if you want to, you can call them honorary dinosaurs. And of course, I'm talking about the flying reptiles, the pterosaurs, and the vast groups of marine reptiles, including plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs and mosasaurs. So, of course, this episode, Sea and Sky, takes place in the late Cretaceous period, in the western interior seaway. So, during part of that epoch, North America was actually split in two, or I guess split in three, by a shallow tropical seaway. And we know about this because there are many fossil sites in the Midwest
Hmm.
and down into the Southwest that are marine fossils, which is kind of funny when you're driving around in a hot desert and
Yep.
buffaloes and cacti everywhere, and then you dig in the ground and there's a seashell or a fish fossil. So it's a very like iconic image in the history of paleontology. But a lot of work has been done in that region, and many of the most popular and familiar of the honorary dinosaurs, of course, have been found in the deposits of the Western Interior Seaway.
Hmm.
Of course, one of those being Pteranodon, which is a large flying reptile, wingspan about I think it's like between 6 and 8 feet, if I remember correctly. Um,
Uh,
or
Meters, I think
bigger
they,
than
they can get bigger. Yeah.
meters. Okay, yeah, right,
Yeah,
right.
like big ones are like I think 6 meters or something like that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. And of course, for many years, this animal has been understood to encompass multiple species.
Hmm.
Um, I think the general consensus has been like what, like two species at
I
least.
think so. I think
Um,
that's a current. Yeah.
right. And I know some researchers have argued that the two species are actually two different genera. And
Hmm.
so there's a whole discourse about that, um, which we don't need to go into right now. But I'll
Hmm.
basically mention that the pteranodon in this film is a species called a Pteranodon sternbergii, but some researchers think that this animal is distinct enough and should be called Geosternbergia
Right.
sternbergii, so double the Sternbergs.
Yes.
Um, of course, this is a famous fossil hunting family that
Hmm.
was stationed in the deposits of the Western Interior Seaway. They've done a lot of work there. Yeah, that concerns that particular animal. The way to tell the two apart, the two pteranodons, is so there's Pteranodon longips,
Longiceps, I think.
longiceps. Okay, yeah, Pteranodon longiceps, and they have, well, the males have a crest on the tip of the head that's rather pointed. It kind of points outward a bit. Um, but in Sternbergii, the crest kind of looks like a sickle
Hmm.
or a scythe. It kind of curls up forwards a bit
Hmm.
more, and it's a little bit thicker in width. But that's really like the main way you can tell them apart. So it's a very distinctive animal.
Hmm.
It's one that I'm very familiar with. It's probably one of my favorite
Hmm.
pterosaurs, incidentally.
Yeah.
Um, and oh my gosh, it's such an atmospheric short film. So without giving too much away, it's basically like the 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 anticipation of the hunt and the uncertainty of, am I going to survive this hunt?
Hmm.
Because of course these animals are living in an environment where they're catching resources in the ocean, in the seaway, that is patrolled by giant marine reptiles that could very easily take one down. I'm of course referring to the Tylosaurus,
Mm,
which is one of the mosasaurs. So if you remember from one of our earlier episodes or earlier news episodes of Through Time and Clades, the mosasaurs were a group of marine-going lizards that have adapted to an aquatic existence
yep.
almost completely. They have flippers. They have like a fin-like tail in most cases. They eat fish and mollusks and other marine organisms, and as far as we know, they probably gave birth in the water.
Yeah,
Although
yeah.
I think
I,
the jury's still out on that.
I think we found evidence now that yeah, they gave live birth in the water.
Oh, have we now?
Yeah.
Okay, well, there you go. Yeah, most of the marine reptiles we've known about their live birth
Yeah.
for many years. Many of the ichthyosaurs, incidentally, have been found with their babies still inside the birth canal. What probably happened was like they were inside the internal eggs, and when the parents died, and the egg kind of withered away, the baby just kind of slipped out during
Mm,
postmortem, which is bodies undergo their own changes after death, which is interesting to find in the fossil record
yeah.
and analyze. We call that taphonomy.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, so this was a very like beautifully done sequence, very atmospheric. Um, I think you had mentioned this to me, Albert, when we first talked about it, that it's another one of those episodes of the Dinosauria that it's over quickly,
Mm,
but like you forget like how long the episode
yeah.
actually is. Like, oh wow, like that kind of just went by. Like you were
Yes.
so invested in it
Right.
that it just kind of happened.
Yep.
um, but yeah, I really enjoyed it quite a bit. Do you have any particular thoughts on it?
Oh yeah. I I definitely enjoyed it a lot, and I would say that so far. So I believe there's still one more kind of film in the Dinosauria series left that has not yet been completed or released, of course. Um, but out of the ones that have been released so far, I would probably say this one's been my favorite. And that's kind of ironic because there aren't any dinosaurs in it. Man, they could have given Hesperornis a cameo or something, but well, it's okay. Pterosaurs and mosasaurs are cool. But yeah, it definitely is really atmospheric, and I would say like the main takeaway I got from this was that it felt a lot like a scene you'd see in a nature documentary. Um, like the animals behave very naturalistically. There's a story going on, but it's very much like a sort of day in the life of, or like a snapshot in the day of a life of these animals, and there is a pretty exciting moment towards the end of the film, but it's very fleeting. It's like there's this build up to it, but it's it definitely feels like something that could just happen out there in nature if you happen to be observing at the right place at the right time. You might be able to catch a glimpse of something like this. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed kind of that atmosphere of it. And if you watch the making of film, because like as with all the other films in the Dinosauria series, David Armsby has created making of film to accompany this, kind of explaining some of his creative decisions and discussing the process of making a film. Uh, he specifically mentions that yes, this film was intended to read like a nature documentary, that it was specifically inspired by like a nature documentary presentation style, and so in that regard, I think he very much succeeded at that. It would, yeah, it is amazing, and I think because of that, that might be part of the reason why um, it feels shorter than it is. So because yeah, you're just so engrossed in what's going on that as it's building up to like that one fleeting action moment at the end, you don't realize how much time has passed, and I think that's kind of pretty true of a lot of like nature documentary sequences, especially a lot of the ones in recent years where we have like really high tech kind of methods of filming like action scenes and such. I think it definitely really captures that very well. So yeah, really good job. I I liked it a lot. I guess as usual because we often kind of nitpick some of the errors in these films. Yeah, might as well mention a couple of them here because there are some. Um, I guess first of all, actually, is one that David Armstrong pointed out in his making of segment. Um, and I actually had not noticed that when I was watching the film. So he pointed out that the pteranodon in the film, he depicted their hind feet as being digitigrade, meaning like walking on their toes. So this is how dinosaurs walk, actual dinosaurs, including birds today, where the most of the foot is actually raised off the ground. So the ankle region, the heel region of the foot is kind of raised off the ground, and they're walking on the essentially the balls of their feet and their toes kind of planted on the ground. Which is why, as we've kind of mentioned in the film before, a lot of people mistakenly think that birds have quote unquote backwards knees, but in fact, the kind of main joint, the backwards pointing joint you see in the hind limb of a bird, is actually the ankle joint. And a lot of the time, this confusion also partially arises from the fact that their actual knees, are tucked up very close to the body, and in birds, it's usually hidden under their feathers, and so you can't really necessarily make out the knee region at first glance. But yeah, that main joint, the backwards pointing one, is in fact the ankle. So that's how dinosaurs walk. They walk on their toes. But pterosaurs, we know, were different. Their hind feet were planted with the heel on the ground, like us humans, basically. And we know this from, say, trackways and also the anatomy itself of the foot. And so in the making of video, David Armsley points out that he actually didn't realize that pterosaurs were plantigrade like us, which is with the heel on the foot, with the heel on the ground, until he had already remade the entire film several times, and by that time, he didn't want to remake it yet again just to fix a minor error, and so he just kind of let it go, and you don't really see the pterosaurs walking for very long in the film anyway, because the majority of the film is showing one particular pterosaur kind of flying over the ocean and diving into the water to catch some fish, and so you don't really see them walking around very much. And so yeah, when I was watching the film, I didn't really notice that he had accidentally made the pterosaurs digitigrade, walking on their toes. But yeah, it's there if you're looking out for it. Something else that I saw a paleontologist mention on Twitter, so I believe that was Richard Carr, who is a fish paleontologist. He pointed out that the environment shown in the film was probably not correct, at least not correct to the Western Interior Seaway. So in the film, it is shown the pteranodon are shown living on these kind of very sheer cliffs, which is a very traditional way of depicting their environment. But in fact, the Western Interior Seaway was not that kind of depositional environment where we would expect sheer cliffs to be. Probably like the shores of the Western Interior Seaway were more flat. So yeah, we probably would not see this kind of sheer cliff on the edges of the Western Interior Seaway, which is quite at odds with how traditionally pterosaurs have often been depicted. Now, there probably were other places in North America, such as further to the west, where there would have been like sheer cliffs formed from erosion, and certainly we can't exclude the possibility that pteranodon occurred over there. But yeah, if this is meant to be the Western Interior Seaway specifically, then it actually represents a very different kind of environment, which is quite interesting. But yeah, other than that, I did not personally notice any particular errors myself. I know some people have kind of made some comments about maybe like the proportions of the mosasaur and such. Like, there are some perhaps minor anatomical details there, but overall, like I personally, not being someone who is particularly familiar with either pterosaurs or mosasaurs, I did not notice any other major kind of errors. And again, it is definitely my favorite out of the Dinosauria episodes that have been released so far. So if you haven't seen it yet, I definitely encourage you to check it out. It is really an amazing work of art, regardless of the accuracy.
Oh, absolutely. And the same goes for all the episodes as well. Um, so wow, one more episode left.
Yeah.
That's kind of sad.
Yeah, I
I
know,
mean,
right?
like I'm glad we've gotten the episodes we've gotten, but it's like I feel like we just got started.
I know, yeah.
Time flies, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, the cliff thing is really interesting, though.
Right.
I know that's been kind of a paleo art trope
Yes.
for the longest time. I mean, at least since Fantasia, and
Right.
probably beyond that, where pterosaurs hanging out on cliffs,
Mm-hmm.
and which if I remember correctly, that was probably because of older ideas about these animals that
Right.
they weren't really active flyers. They were
Mm.
probably gliding on thermals most of the time.
Right.
So, in order to get to those thermals, you had to live on a cliff and then just kind of drop yourself
Mm-hmm.
from the rocks and then just open up your wings and fly around. But of course, we know much more about these animals,
Right.
and they were certainly very competent flyers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Probably more so than bats in some cases.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, just truly amazing animals indeed. Um, that's really exciting. It's exciting to hear about um, your work, and of course, Gerald Meyer. Congratulations on the second edition of what is certainly a very ambitious book.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so about a 10-year gap between editions. That's really interesting. Some of you might remember from Humanity a Prologue. One of the main resources I used there was Brian Fagan's and Nadia Durrani's People of the Earth,
Mm.
which is a large textbook about human prehistory. And that one gets about 4 to 5 years between volumes.
Mm.
So there's a lot of massive input between those different editions because yeah, in both of these fields, there's just so much research that goes on. You got
Yeah.
to incorporate all of that. Um, and you know what? It's kind of nice that there you've been treating Meyer's comments rather civilly, I suppose. With sort of scientific dignity, um, which is interesting because I had just finished a scientific book. So this is by journalist Kermit Pattison. This is Fossil Men: The Quest for the Oldest Skeleton and the Origins of Humankind.
Hmm.
And this is basically an account of the discovery and description of the Arty specimen, that is Ardipithecus ramidus,
Yeah.
from Ethiopia in the middle of Wash Valley. So of course this was a over 15-year effort on the part of a paleoanthropologist, Tim White, and his colleagues to excavate the skeleton. And the book goes in detail about all of this,
Hmm.
like the trials of getting through the country and actually finding the bones and the sheer amount of luck that it took to get those bones out when they did. Because Artie's skeleton was very fragmentary,
Hmm.
very fragile. They would pull it out of the dirt and the bones would start to crumble apart. So they actually had to go and do all of like the chemical sealant as they were digging out the bones and going in with like the tiniest tools, even resorting to porcupine quills at some points to just kind of poke around the bones and get them out of this little ditch area. And yeah, again, like the luck, the window of timing to get those bones out of the ground were remarkable because it was the rainy season during the time. And if they had waited maybe a few days or a few weeks, there was a high possibility that there was a heavy rain and flood would have gone down that ditch and just dissolved the bones away.
Hmm.
So we almost lost the Arty specimen due to the elements,
Wow.
which says a lot about the precariousness of paleontology in
Yep.
general. How lucky we've been able to find so many fossils when we did, because
Mm-hmm.
chances are many of them are going away due to wind and rain and other things, human error, as we speak.
Yep.
And so it's good that everyone's out there doing the work that they do. Um, but I mentioned the sort of scientific civility because if you're interested in the history of paleoanthropology, not necessarily the specimens themselves, but like the people behind the discoveries, it is a very steamy, spicy field with a lot of rivalries and a
Mm.
lot of heartbreak. And my goodness, does this book go into all of it, the most uncomfortable details. You have colleagues screaming at each other, you have colleagues calling each other idiots or fools or backwards people who are part of the old school and they don't know the value of real work. You got people who forbid access to specimens. You have people who hide away specimens for themselves until they're ready to present them
Mm.
in limited amounts. Um, and so nobody really comes out of the field as like a hero
Mm,
or a villain.
right.
They're very complex characters, and it's I often found myself going back and forth between my thoughts on the particular individuals involved
Mm,
because my goodness, um, I am very used to um, sort of camaraderie in the sciences.
mm,
I mean, all of our friends are very science-minded people, and they're always sharing information that they find, and
mm,
and we try to encourage the sort of openness to science, to and open honesty as well. Like you don't get too attached to
mm,
ideas.
mm,
Don't exhaust all of your energy by yourself. Work with other people. Think outside the box, certainly. Um, and yeah, there was some of that described in this book, but it was pretty much a minority of things. And yeah, there are some heated rivalries in Paleoant.
mm, mm,
Um, for example, Tim White was part of the original team back in the 70s that dug up the Lucy skeleton. So he was working with the paleoanthropologist Don Johanson. Um, well, of course, in time they had a falling out, so they don't really speak to each other that much anymore.
mm,
And so, of course, there was a whole back and forth about what Artie meant. And Artie was revealing a lot of things that were far from the norm in paleoanthropology and even sought to break some paradigms within the field. And of course, there were a lot of people who were resistant to that.
mm,
And so the book talks about all these sort of things. And at the end of the day, for me, I mean, the Artie specimen is very special. And what Tim White and his team were able to do was remarkable, I think,
mm, mm.
um, and really bringing to life like the total environment and life ways of Ardipithecus hominis that they were able to get. Because if you remember from Humanity: A Prologue, they were able to go into the environment, look at the soil context, they look at the climate, the vegetation, the wildlife, and they were able to basically build Artie's world from the ground up and reveal some interesting things about what early hominins were doing about 4.5 million years ago. So it's a really remarkable story and a really great book, and I highly recommend it.
Mm.
And it'll definitely have you thinking long and hard about what science is supposed to be and how to be a good scientist.
Mm, mm.
You know, because man, some of these guys that they talk about in the book, and they're mostly guys, hence
Mm,
the title of the book, which is
right.
sort of an unfortunate thing in paleoanth. Um, they it's amazing that we know anything at all about human origins with people like this working in the field
Mm.
and their feuds with each other
Mhm.
because if things had gone the wrong way then these fossils would probably have been hidden forever
Mm.
or just never found to begin with. um like so much double crossing and it makes the bone wars look tame,
Right,
you know.
right.
But so that's kind of been like the big thing that I've been reading, on top of a blog post that we're going to do a little shout out to. So many of you might know our friend Henry,
Mm.
who does the theme music for our series, the wonderful tune that we open up each episode with. Well, he has a blog, Those with Pycnofibers. So that's a Zenchengopteryx at wordpress.com, or .wordpress.com, excuse me. And we wanted to share because we wanted to share his latest blog post. So he had just written this up, for those who are interested. We'll put a link in the description. So this is about plate tectonics in the far future. So ever since the 80s and certainly beyond, many different geologists have looked at the evidence of plate tectonics, how continental plates move across the surface of the Earth, and they've been able to make estimations about where the continents are going next. We talk about Pangaea and Rodinia and the collision of India with Eurasia. And so we know a lot about plate tectonics in the past. And we can use what we've learned in the past and based on our observations in the present to make informed decisions about where the continents are going to go in the future. And so, like his post talks a little bit about that and kind of mentions some of the key ideas that there's at least of the main consensus about continental movements because every model that people have come up with is different. but there are a couple of main key ideas, like the idea that Australia and Wallacea are moving northward, that East Africa is rifting apart from the rest of the continent and will probably be its own landmass in the
Mm.
near future. Of course, the African plate itself is just continuing to smush into Europe, and the Americas will probably fuse back into Eurasia at some point. And then there's the general idea that we'll probably have another supercontinent within several million years, several hundred million years into the future.
Mm. Mm.
And people already come up with like 5 different names for it. um, so I guess whatever one sticks, I mean, we won't find out because we'll all
Mm.
be dead by then. But who knows? Who knows? Maybe we'll see. But yes, definitely we recommend that. So zentanoptrics.wordpress.com. Um, Plate Tectonics in the Far Future. That's a blog post by Henry. So we definitely encourage you all to give it a read and learn some things
Mm. Mm.
about plate tectonics. It's a really fascinating article. Um, yeah, those have kind of been like the main things that I've been doing lately, in between just thinking about the global situation, as you had mentioned. Our hearts certainly go out to the Ukraine,
Mm. Mm.
and to Russia as well. It's never fun when state-induced violence
Mm.
occurs, and there's no good wars.
Yeah.
So we can only hope that you know things clear up as soon as possible. And I mean, for me at least, like I'm very hopeful in a way for the situation. I mean, just seeing the massive global response
Mm. Mm.
against what has been happening,
Yeah. Mm.
you know, it, it certainly tells you a lot about the state of the world where, a war is going on and like the global response, like for most of the globe,
Yeah.
is what? No, we don't want this. We don't support it.
Right.
Um, so just like insanely massive camaraderie has been going on, and that kind of gives me some hope that things might be better
Yeah.
fairly soon.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
of course, we can never really know with 100% certainty what tomorrow brings.
Mm.
Um, that's kind of one of the ironies of world history. We talk about history repeating itself, but the amount of variables that go into historical events are so infinite
Yeah.
and vast that you can never make predictions that'll stand a test of time. And many people have tried, and we look back at them now and we laugh, you know. So it makes no sense to do that now. Just
Mm.
kind of keep an eye on things, pay attention to reputable news sources, and do whatever you can to support the people involved, and just make sure there's less suffering as possible. So yeah, that's definitely been on our minds for sure. But no, we've been doing all right, I think
Mm.
so.
Mm.
And we're happy that y'all are able to join us for our series and maybe get a little bit of reprieve from global events.
Right.
So yeah, Albert, if there was anything else you wanted to add, we could move on to my first story.
That sounds good. Yeah. Mm.
All right, we'll do that. So, all right, we have a couple of new insights into hominin stone industries that may be key in understanding both their form and function and their incipient usage. So, for the first part of my section, I'm going to talk about two papers. It themed very well. I love it when this happens. So, the first paper comes from Julio Mercader and colleagues, so no relation to the infamous map maker. Um, uh, a big question right now in paleoanthropology is just what types of materials stone tools were used on. Specifically, the Oldowan, which is one of the oldest industries, is of concern here. And that consists of pebble or percussion tools that would have been constructed by hand through pounding. So you take a cobblestone and you strike it with another stone, and that detaches flakes. And you can either use the flakes as blades or knives, or you can use the sharpened edges of the cobblestone as sort of like an axe or a chopping tool, if you will. They call them choppers.
Mm.
And while there has been a lot of hypothesizing about these tools, we still don't have truly definitive evidence of their use. There are a few sites of animal carcasses with cut marks of a sort that experimental archaeologists have produced with makeshift Oldowan tools that provide possible evidence that early hominins, and here, that usually means members of Homo habilis
Hmm.
or Homo rudolfensis that were using those specific tools. We're using them to cut away muscle, fat, and marrow from bones. But paleoanthropologists have also postulated a use in processing plant foods. So that can be digging up roots and tubers, or cutting away branches and twigs, or pounding up fruits and leaves, or cracking open nuts and seeds. But again, we lack the sort of evidence needed to make those specific links. And some researchers have suggested looking at the wear on the tools themselves to find possible uses. And this is something that experimental archaeologists have done with more recent industries, but there are still problems of ambiguity. I mean, you can test all the materials you want, but if you don't have any direct evidence of the use of said materials on the excavated stone tools, well, all you'd be doing is finding approximate uses,
Hmm.
which is fine, I suppose. But I mean, if you want that nitty gritty data, that would help us out a lot more in truly understanding these materials. And Mercator et al. Mainly draw attention to one specific issue. So, uncovered stone tools are moved around in an archaeological site and in the lab so much, after their discovery, that should there be any microscopic residues of past usage on them, which has been proposed, well, I mean, these would certainly be contaminated or smeared or just lost altogether. If you could retrieve stone tools carefully and place them within an environmental context and check for residues, and then distinguish between natural causes and direct usage by human hands, well, then you'd be on the right path to making links between tools and materials. And that's basically what the team did for this study. They headed out to the Oldupai Gorge in Tanzania, which is the famous archaeological site where the Leakey family made a name for themselves by uncovering the fossils and tools of hominins like Paranthropus boisei and Homo habilis, who were contemporaries, by the way, between 2.3 and 1.6 million years ago. And the latter is generally proposed to have been the tool maker, which is where the name Homo habilis comes from. It's the handyman. Um, there's a particular rock outcrop in the north called the Nabor-Swa Kubwa that was a major source of raw materials for early hominids, as evidenced by the fact that the same types of quartzitic rocks used in the Oldowan industry in the region are found there. You may remember from episode 5 of Humanity: A Prologue that early Homo sought out specific rock types in the use of stone tool making. So, among 4 areas of the outcrop, you had one team using gloved hands to extract 28 cobbles and pebbles and 28 natural clasts, which they took care to place in these super clean plastic bags for further analysis. They didn't want to take any chances.
Hmm.
They even wore masks as they searched around so that they wouldn't breathe on the stones and accidentally contaminate them
Hmm.
that way. And the team took care to record the GIS location as well as the soil composition. And then a second team went in and they went and grabbed 9 regular old surface blanks or unmanufactured stones so that they could experiment on them. And so they could nap them away, make their own Oldowan pounding tools, and once that was done, they could use them on different plants. So they experimented with prickly pear fruits from cactus, hazelnuts, potatoes, and mulberry wood, along with pork and cow bones from a local meat shop, just for added comparison. Next, the two teams mapped out the remaining residues on both the naturally occurring clasts and the shaped experimental pounding tools. They actually wanted to leave the excavated tools that hominins would have used for a future study. So those aren't of concern at the moment. But then they soaked those stones in specially prepared water, followed by some orbital shaking and ultrasonic cleaning, which is used by specific lab equipment. And to do that, they wanted to make sure they could extract all the different residues for closer inspection and identification under the microscope. They're looking for anything from pollen to phytoliths to even diatoms and sponge spicules. And what Mercator and colleagues found was that there was a notable distinction between naturally occurring and anthropogenic microbotanical residues.
Hmm.
So the surface blanks, these being the unmanufactured stones, have their residues dispersed across their surface in random locations. And this is because, exposed to the elements, these rocks can accumulate all sorts of organic materials, usually through the actions of lithobionts. These are non-parasitic surface-living organisms, kind of like lichens or moss. And these can trap, plant materials and then accrete them to the rocks. So then they had subsurface blanks, so they excavated some rocks from the ground, and these showed a similar pattern. But on the anthropogenically manufactured stones, the microbotanical residues were clustered together in specific, mostly non-random areas, as would be expected from a repeated usage on plant materials like pounding or chopping. And there still were environmentally produced residues here, but the handmade signals were very prominent, so they could tell, okay, there's a lot of action going on in this part of the stone. And it wasn't always foolproof, as they discovered. It appears some of the plants that they had tested on actually don't leave good residues. For example, on the stones used to crack hazelnuts, they were not able to find any leftover starches. And the same was true for the stones that smashed the prickly pear fruits. And incidentally, they were able to find cross-contamination on the stones that were used for both animal parts and plants. So they could actually detect that as well. But, for the most part, the team was able to retrieve most of the residue on the stones and make these connections between them and the organic materials being processed, even after all the extensive cleaning that they went through in the lab. And in doing this, Mercator and colleagues were able to provide an interesting method for detecting usage in Oldowan tools, by first demonstrating a way to distinguish between natural and anthropogenic residue production. And this is the key. According to the authors, and I quote here, this referential serves to remove the uncontrollable introduction of environmental signals when discriminating function, paleodiet, from ecological context. Failure to account for these will inevitably result in flawed data and misinterpretation of both natural controls and archaeological cases. So now that that has been done, other teams can then go to their Oldowan collections and begin the admittedly more difficult process of removing and studying residues on those tools, with the request by these authors that they at least return to the source site for those collections and then carefully gather environmental data on the surface blanks that they could then compare with those Oldowan tools, and then go through the mapping and cleaning process that they did to retrieve the data, which I presume is what the team is going to do with the cobblestones and flakes that they had found at the site. So we'll keep an eye out for that study. But yeah, only then can the work of determining direct tool use really go somewhere. So I thought that this was a brilliant study that, even though it didn't necessarily analyze the stone tools themselves, they still did an important information gathering experiment on a new procedure. So that's pretty cool. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think this kind of work is very important because, yeah, like you like you mentioned, being able to properly identify which tools are actually tools, it's obviously going to have a lot of implications about how you study and interpret them. So, yeah, I think this. I'm sure this will be a very valuable study for the future.
Yeah, and I mean it'll especially be good for determining stone tools themselves. I mean, we had just talked about the fact that horses, when they polish their hooves,
Yeah.
they basically make stones that look like stone tools. And if you can do a sort of residue analysis on those types of stones, well, you'd be able to tell, okay, this was made by a horse chipping its foot, and we found residues on this stone. This was definitely a tool that was made by human hands. So that's possibly a way to discriminate between that as well, which will be helpful because, again, we have a lot of really intriguing tool sites going back about 2.5 million years that are in locations where we haven't found hominins. So it'd be really good to know if those are actually tools made by hominins, which can then bring us further in understanding what was going on during that period of the world. So that was pretty cool. So okay, the second paper on the next slide. This is by Alba Motes Rodrigo and colleagues, and it goes a little bit further back in time to the dawn of stone tool making. Um, Observations of living great apes, so orangutans, gorillas, and chimps, shows that they don't engage with this type of technological behavior. They can use stones as tools. So, like one West African chimpanzee culture will select particular rocks from outcrops and then use them to crack palm nuts,
Mm-hmm.
subsequently teaching their offspring how to do that. But they don't nap stones into the desired shapes
Mm-hmm.
for use. And to date, attempts to teach captive apes to make and use tools have produced mixed results. So there is the 1972 experiment by RVS Wright, which tried to teach a captive young orangutan named Abang the art of using and creating stone tools. But while he was only able to use a pre-made cutting tool after multiple tries and demonstrations, he also took many attempts to nap a stone tool by his own hand and was only able to use one of the flakes produced to cut with.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a huge learning curve, and even after finally managing to finish the experiments, Abang was still unable to fashion a tool by the usual means that archaeologists have been able to reduce. So he wasn't like using his hands to bang the stones together. He would kind of like slam the rock down to create the flakes.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's Kanzi. So Kanzi is a bonobo who had been heavily enculturated by humans and has performed many experiments throughout his life. If you're familiar with linguistics work, you may have heard of his
Mm-hmm.
contributions to that. Um, there were a number of studies done with him starting in the late 90s that tried to uncover multiple aspects of stone tool making, as was done beforehand. Um, and so there's in their 2008 book, The First Africans, by Lawrence Barham and Peter Mitchell, they talk about this. And so to quote here, Kanzi initially preferred to create flakes by throwing a stone core against a hard surface, but when forced to use two hands, showed a limited understanding of the interplay between the geometry of the core and the angle and force of the blow needed to remove large flakes with consistency. His handheld napping is characterized by repetitive and often unproductive banging together of two rocks. The resulting flakes are small by comparison with those found in early Oldowan assemblages, and Kanzi's limited precision grip means his application of force is also limited when holding a flake for cutting. So the key issue for paleoanthropologists wanting to understand stone toolmaking, you know, there's a particular anatomy of the hand needed to use stone tools in particular
Mm-hmm.
ways. And while the oldest stone industries, so that being the Lomequian of Kenya at 3.3 million years ago, again heavily controversial, they show evidence of intentional napping by either hitting a rock on a stationary hammerstone or using bipolar impacting, so holding a rock against another rock and striking it with a third rock.
Mm-hmm.
The later Oldowan industry reveals a more complex methodology, requiring manual dexterity to shape the tools you need. Australopithecines seem to have already had human-like hands with some capacity to form a precision grip,
Mm-hmm.
and subsequent work with Ardipithecus ramidus and Miocene apes shows that this condition is generally ancestral to the great apes and was only tweaked in hominins through a shortening of the fingers and an enlarging of the thumb. But the great apes, by contrast, they didn't keep this ancestral hand, and each one adapted it through their own life ways, which is why gorillas and chimps knuckle walk using different strategies, and orangutans walk with their fists in a very awkward shuffling. So thus, Kanzi could not produce Oldowan type stone tools, even if he wanted to, instead crafting crude bifacial cores through very rough methods. He was able to grasp some understanding of stone tool use,
Mm-hmm.
at least being able to cut with flakes, but like Abang before him, he could not have produced stone tool technologies on his own. And these apes had to be taught how to make them. And even then, they struggled considerably. And further studies seem to have corroborated these observations. So any excitement about chimpanzees entering the Stone Age, I don't think is very warranted.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Motes Rodrigo and colleagues note, especially, that these early studies fail to tell us whether the stone tool using behaviors are something that apes had to be taught or whether they're already part of their behavioral repertoire.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also sample size issues.
Yeah.
You had these studies of individual apes trying to make and use stone tools when there's a strong case to be made that early hominin stone industries were a collaborative affair.
Mm.
And there's the all too present issue in any ethological study of whether using captive and culturated animals can really tell us important information about wild animals
Right.
outside of human influences. So, to try and remedy this, the team set up their own experiments using a group of 5 captive but unenculturated orangutans that had never undergone prior experiments before. First, they wanted to see what would happen when orangutans were provided with stones to use without any guidance on the part of the authors. Second, they wanted to see if orangutans could understand the value in using stone tools and then motivate them to do so. And third, they wanted to see how social demonstrations influenced the tool making and using of orangutans. So, the first experiment involved 2 males from the Kristiansand Zoo in Norway who voluntarily participated because their enclosures were being cleaned, so they had nowhere to be. The orangutans were provided with 2 bait boxes that needed a stone flake to cut open, which slightly mimics a scenario where early hominins would need to cut away tendons to get at the flesh in a carcass.
Mm.
They were given hammer stones made out of concrete, a prepped chert core that was fixed to a metal platform and was prepared in advance to allow for easier flaking, and a set of prepped flint flakes. And these were all done for various safety reasons, so that the orangutans couldn't, take the stones and hurt themselves
Mm.
if it came to that. And then cameras were set up to film everything, as there was to be no human demonstrations for this particular experiment. Well, none of the orangutans managed to nap flakes from the cores, but they did do a lot of banging with the hammer stones. They would go around their testing area and just hit them along the floors and the walls.
Mm.
So this suggested at least an understanding of percussive behavior, which is interesting
Yeah.
because orangutans rarely, if ever, use stones in the wild.
Right.
At one point, one of the orangutans did pick up a flake and hold it between his lips to press it into the bait box in sort of a kissing motion, just enough to make an opening, which he could then manipulate with his fingers to open the box.
Mm.
So it did have at least an understanding that a sharp stone could be used to cut.
Mm.
But otherwise, that same orangutan just seemed to play around with the flakes without really using them to cut.
Mm.
He would open the box and just hit the flake against the box a bunch of times, just messing around with it like a toddler.
Right.
Um, so the second experiment involved the same males from the previous experiment and the same bait boxes and tools. Although in this case, one of the cores was actually refitted with previously chipped flakes, so that they glued them back onto the stone after they were hit,
Mm.
so that way they could help make connections in use and then encourage those napping behaviors. This time around, human intervention was included, but only to emphasize to the orangutans the bait boxes and the
Mm.
stone tools, especially the flakes, but without showing them how to use them.
Yeah.
And this way, they introduced value into the equation. So, for example, the authors would lay out the flakes for the orangutans and ask them to trade a flake for a grape. And again, cameras are set up to film. And yeah, again, none of the orangutans napped their own flake tools. That refitted core actually didn't help at all
Mm.
because the orangutans found that they could just pick off the flakes with their fingers and
Mm.
teeth. So they didn't use the stone to break them off.
Uh-huh.
Um, but they did perform several percussive behaviors again. And if you're interested, some screenshots of that footage are shown here in the photos above. You can see the one orangutan just kind of banging the rock.
Hmm.
So imagine that a bunch of times. That's basically what percussive behavior is. But the neat finding this time was that the action of the percussive behavior did produce flakes on
Mm.
their own. On the bottom left, you can see some of the flakes that were chipped from the core of the core stone while the orangutans were bashing them around. But they didn't really make any thoughts about these new flakes they had made. So they didn't make the leap to, oh, I'll take this flake and use it as a cutting tool. So again, a no-go there. But the third experiment was actually held at a different facility. So this was the Tweecross Zoo in the UK. and this involved a different group of orangutans, this time being three adult females. And this ensured that the team would acquire fresh behaviors, because there's always a possibility that the previously experimented on orangutans would become used to the procedure after doing so many tests,
Right.
so it kind of loses its explanatory value. But here, the experimenters provided the same types of bait boxes, but they each gave them three concrete hammerstones, three fixed shirt cores, but no flint flakes. This time, the orangutans actually had to watch first behind glass as the human demonstrators worked with the stone tools on the bait boxes. So they
Mm.
actually had to observe the striking of the hammerstones to the cores to produce flakes and the cutting of the boxes. And they made sure that they did this several times so the orangutans could see this. Like they did it at least 27 times, like just showing how this works before letting the orangutans in to test for themselves. But despite all these procedures, none of the orangutans were able to replicate the experimenter's actions. In fact, in a similar situation to experiment two, one of them did take a hammerstone, but they tried to use it like a core tool,
Mm.
and they would strike it multiple times, again, percussing, and they produced chip pieces. And so we have those photographed here on the bottom right. That orangutan would like lick and sniff at the stone pieces, but didn't do anything else with them,
Mm. Mm.
even though they were sharp enough to use as knives. And that same orangutan later actually did proceed to use those tools in a more proper manner. So, like, they would hit the core stone with the hammerstone. So, they got really close. So, here's an orangutan using a hammerstone properly, but no flakes.
Mm.
So, in a way, these experiments were pretty much failures in the sense that none of the orangutans used the tools in the way Montez Rodrigo and colleagues were hoping. And just based on this and the earlier aforementioned experiments, it seems that non-human great apes need more than direct observation in order to make and use stone tools
Mm.
in the way of our early hominin ancestors. Um, so the question is, what could they be missing?
Mm. Mm.
Um, in an article by New Science that described this study, Montez Rodrigo did say, and I quote, "It may be that the orangutans can't understand the spatial relations involved in shaping tools, or can't think far enough ahead." Um, that's certainly a dimension worth investigating in future studies. There certainly has to be a reason that we find stone tool technology so prevalently in the human archaeological
Mm.
record, while there's pretty much nothing for the other apes. Um, at most, all we have is one percussive rock outcrop in the Ivory Coast
Mm.
that chimpanzees have been using for 4,300 years.
Mm. Mm.
But again, like it's a different tool making, it's a different tool use from what hominids were doing. But you know what? Even though the experiment was not a success, in a way, it did show that orangutans, at least, have a basic understanding of stone percussion and are able to do that spontaneously.
Mm. Mm.
And at least one orangutan managed to use a flake as a cutting tool. Um, so while wild individuals don't use stones, as I explained, they have been observed doing percussive behaviors with sticks
Mm.
on insect nests. Of course, orangutans are arboreal after all.
Right.
They're more likely to use sticks as tools than stones all the way on the ground,
Mm.
where
Mm.
it's dangerous. Um, and captive orangutans, in contrast, have been observed using stones as percussive tools. In fact, in some cases, actually trying to break open locks. Um, there's a fun history between um, tool experiments with orangutans and tool experiments with chimps,
Mm.
where in a lot of cases chimps will just kind of mess around with the tools, but if you give an orangutan an object, they'll hide it away,
Mm.
and when the people aren't watching, then they'll pull it out and try to figure it out on their own in
Right.
secret. So there's interesting things there.
Mm. Mm.
Um, but like that is corroborating evidence for this ability that orangutans can use percussion.
Mm. Mm.
Um, and so that suggests that lithic percussion may have been something that our common ancestor with orangutans may have engaged in, meaning that it could go back something like 15 to 12 million years. Um, of course, then the question is, how do you detect that in the fossil record? Um, Well, to the best of the author's abilities, those percussive instances seem to mostly be play behaviors on the part of the
Mm,
orangutans.
mm,
So like it didn't seem like, oh, I need to use this as a tool. It's
right,
like, oh, look at this cool thing. It's like a toy. I'm gonna
right.
bang it around my enclosure and have a wild time with it. Um, that ties closely to suggestions from anthropologists, who have studied human children at play, that play behaviors may have played a role in the origin of stone tool making,
Mm, mm,
which, that might sound odd, but the role of non-utilitarian behaviors in the development of later utilitarian behaviors like tool use has been long discussed in anthropology.
mm, mm.
Lewis Mumford, in his 1964 book Techniques in Human Development, argued at length about this for a number of now human cultural things taken for granted. And on a related note, the ability of that one young orangutan to use a flake tool in his mouth to cut at the bait box also has intriguing implications. You know, at no time did that orangutan use his hand to work that tool.
Mm.
So perhaps oral tool use may have been an initial early step
Hmm.
in the development of stone tool technologies. Um, but again, that's debatable, just based on the presence of manually dexterous hands so early in human and hominid evolution, it seems. So, yeah, in either case, these experiments do indicate that there were some rudimentary behaviors that our early great ape ancestors may have had that seem to have been the key stepping stones towards the path of stone tool use.
Mhm.
So, yeah, even though they didn't, develop a tool using orangutan of the sort that Homo habilis may have been, this is still a crucial step,
Yep.
crucial study in understanding just what is going on. So I'm all for it. What do you think, Albert?
Yeah, definitely. I think that this kind of experiment on like animal cognition is always fascinating. We've talked quite a bit about the kind of the subject of animal cognition before, mostly to do with birds, because in Dinosaurs, the second chapter, we had that whole discussion about kind of very complex cognition in some groups of birds, namely parrots and corvids, which are the crows and their relatives. Um,
Mhm.
and so, I mean, I think, yeah, one could say that this study was not a success in that they weren't able to get the orangutans to replicate the procedure they were being shown. However, it still very much is a very informative study. What they found, informative about the cognitive processes and abilities of orangutans, and potentially also those of our STEM human ancestors as well. So I think it is important to get these kinds of studies published, because even if you don't find the result that you were looking for, uh, you can still be shedding substantial light on certain subjects like this. Um, and I would be interested to see like this experiment maybe repeated with chimps, for example, because like you said, chimps are actually known to use stone tools in the wild, unlike orangutans, which probably don't encounter stones quite as often. So I would I wonder like whether or not you could find some different types of patterns if you tried the chimps. I don't know. It would be something worth investigating, I think. But yeah, definitely very interesting and even if one might consider it a failed experiment, it definitely is still an extremely informative one.
Absolutely, and I agree. You don't need to have your big eureka moment in an experiment for it to be important.
Yep.
Sometimes finding out that things aren't the case is just not, if even more so important.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm definitely all for it. Um, yeah, I would agree too. To do this with unculturated chimpanzees, which I'm sure you could find in various areas.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually very curious myself. I haven't dug too deep into this, but I wonder if anybody's ever done studies like this with gorillas.
Right. Yeah.
I know they're fairly derived as far as great apes go,
Mm-hmm.
but we'll be interesting to get the dimension too, because they are more closely related to chimps and humans than they are to
Yeah.
orangutans. Well, than any of us are to orangutans. Um, so maybe that could fill out some cognitive gaps
Mm.
or technological gaps. It's not the literature is not vast, but like gorillas have been shown to use tools.
Mm.
Um, there was one individual that made a walking stick to cross a body of water.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and I believe some of them have been doing the termite fishing thing
Mm.
that chimps have done as well.
Right.
But beyond that, there's not really a whole lot
Mm.
compared to chimpanzees, especially. So yeah, I'd be interested in that as well. Um, yeah, so animal cognition is pretty fun. I understand, Albert, your first study that you're going to talk about is kind of related to that, especially.
Yeah, you're right. Funny how we have themes like that sometimes. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so our next study is indeed, as we shall see on the next slide, related to animal cognition. Um, but the interesting thing, or one of the interesting things about this study, is that that wasn't really what these researchers were trying to study to begin with. Yeah. So, what these researchers were originally setting out to do were that they were testing a new type of tracking device that they could put on wild birds to study, where birds go and such. Because, yeah, these kinds of tracking devices have been extremely useful in studying animal movements and such, as you might be able to imagine. Because if you want to figure out where a wild animal goes and when it goes to those places and how far it travels and so on and so forth, then like actually physically following them is not always a practical option. Like they might go to places where you can't follow them to. Obviously, having to spend all day tracking them, just following after them, is a whole lot of work, and also has its own logistical difficulties. So yeah, putting these tracking devices on animals has taught us a lot about you know animal movements. And has given us a lot of insight that we otherwise would not have been able to get. And in fact, I believe we've talked about some studies that have made use of similar technologies. Like I think we talked about like elephant seals, for example, like where they go and feed when they're not breeding on the beaches. That kind of research was done using tracking devices. Now, however, there are some limitations to these tracking devices as well. And one of these is that currently it's still very difficult for us to make very small tracking devices for these animals. Now, it is physically possible to make small tracking devices. However, the problem is that the device itself, like it's not just like the tracking technology. Like you also have to put a battery in there and so on when you're trying to design these devices for field work. And the smaller it is, the harder it is to kind of get a battery to fit it with a battery that will last long enough to get like substantial results that you want when you're studying wild animal movements. And so it is still a challenge to kind of do these kinds of studies on small bodied animals like songbirds. So these researchers, they had kind of designed a new type of tracking device that they hoped would pave the way for these smaller devices that could be fitted onto ever smaller types of animals. And so the way it's supposed to work is kind of pictured on the figure here. So in the top left is a photo of what the tracking device looks like. So it's got the device is basically attached to like these strings that act as a harness. And so the idea is that you attach the tracking device to a bird, as shown in the top right there. So it kind of wearing it like a harness. And so the idea is that this very small tracking device, first of all, it can be charged by Wi-Fi signal, so you don't have to fit a battery onto it. Or at least not a very big one that can store a lot of energy. And secondly is that what they hoped would happen was that they could get these birds to revisit feeding stations that they have set up. And so at these feeding stations, they would be able to set up, places where the tracker could be charged, and furthermore, they could set up magnets. And so what they have done is that they have built in a mechanism in the harness where if it reacts with a magnet, the part of the harness just kind of breaks loose, and so that's kind of shown in the bottom left. There is that the magnetized tracking device kind of breaks loose at a weak point, and then the tracking device drops off the animal, and then the researchers can come to the feeding station afterward and pick up the tracking device without having to like recapture the bird all over again, because obviously that's another ordeal. And that is in fact a problem with kind of doing these kind of tracking studies on animals, because sometimes you have to go back and recapture that animal again, and yeah, that can be difficult. And so yeah, the bird departs, but it leaves the tracking device behind, and researchers can come back and pick it up and extract whatever information they need from it. So it seems like a good idea. So they decided to test these devices on Australian magpies, which is also the species pictured in the figure here. And they chose these particular species because, well, first of all, they're fairly common in Australia. They're pretty easy to find, and also they are relatively big by songbird standards. They're like the size of a crow or so. These tracking devices are definitely more than small enough that they probably wouldn't like impede the activities of these birds too much. Now, for those of us who don't live in Australia and might be familiar with magpies in our parts of the world, the Eurasian magpies are very common here in the UK. Australian magpies are not closely related to the magpies we have in other parts of the world. Like they are not true magpies. They just happen to be called magpies because they have this kind of black and white coloration that a lot of true magpies have. So of course, colonists who came to Australia saw the similarities and decided to call them magpies. But in fact, they are not even corvids, so they are not members of the crow and raven and jay and magpie group. So even though they are somewhat superficially similar, being like relatively decently sized songbirds with like fairly robust beaks and these kind of black and white color patterns, they are not corvids. Now, they are somewhat closely related to corvids, yeah, I'll grant you that. But they still represent a distinct and separate lineage within that larger group. In fact, the birds of paradise of New Guinea and surrounding areas, they are more closely related to corvids than the Australian magpies are. The Australian magpies are actually members of a group of songbirds called they're called the butcher birds and the wood swallows, or the technical name are the artamids. And they're mostly found in Australia, although they also get up into Southeast Asia and Southern Asia as well. So yeah, not all that familiar to those of us who live in the Northern Hemisphere. But they do look superficially similar, and they aren't as well studied in terms of their cognitive abilities compared to actual corvids. However, there are a lot of like anecdotal reports that suggest that Australian magpies are probably pretty smart as well. There are a lot of reports that seem to suggest that they might be able to recognize individual humans, which is something that has also been shown in the true corvids. They'll recognize people who have bothered them before and then come back and harass those people if they see them again. They'll recognize people who have given them food before and then come and visit them if they think there's food around. They seem to have relatively complex cognitive abilities as well, and they're also very social birds living in these flocks. Are cooperative breeders, which means that in addition to the kind of like the mated pair in the group that taking care of their own young, so the parents, instead of just the parents taking care of their own young, there are also other members of the group that will come in and help. And a lot of the time these might be like older siblings of the currently nest-bound generation, or they might be like kind of unaffiliated adults who have kind of left their parent flock but are looking for a place to settle down. And so, yeah, very social and complex social behaviors, potentially very complex cognitive abilities. And so it turns out that when these researchers were testing out these tracking devices, they kind of came across a rather unexpected challenge in terms of the practicality of this particular design that they had come up with. Um, Something else that's kind of funny and kind of related to this is that Australia is, it has a stereotype for being like, oh, the wildlife there is super dangerous. You have all these venomous spiders and venomous snakes that can kill you, and in a lot of ways, it is a rather overblown kind of reputation. But I have seen a joke that's like, what people think are the scariest animals in Australia versus what actual Australians are scared of. And the joke is that actual Australians are more scared of Australian magpies than they are of like venomous snakes and spiders and such. Well, for one thing, Australian magpies are a lot easier to encounter in most regions. And for another is that they will actually like aggressively attack people in some cases. They are very defensive of their nests, so a lot of time when people come too close to where they're breeding, even if it's unintentional, they'll kind of swoop at people and sometimes even striking, although not always directly, like actually landing a blow, but definitely it can be very startling because these are quite large birds, and because people usually move away after being attacked by an Australian magpie, they learn that this kind of behavior works, and so kind of repeat offenders will kind of continue to perpetuate this kind of behavior. Now, not all individual magpies, Australian magpies, engage in this behavior. It is only some of the population, but nonetheless, it definitely is an issue in some regions, and so people have to come up with ways to kind of get around it. And even though it is rare, occasionally they can result in like moderately serious injuries to people, like if they happen to hit someone in the eye, for example. That's not very nice. So yeah, Australia's actual scariest wildlife is at least a potential candidate for it is this particular species. So yeah, I was fortunate enough to be able to observe them in the wild when I visited Australia at one time for the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology conference, and they are amazing birds. I was lucky enough not to be swooped at by them. And they make these amazing kind of calls. They definitely, even though they look kind of like corvids, they do not sound like them. They have very musical kind of vocalizations that get very complex, like very interesting series of like whistling kind of noises. Yeah, not like the cawing or screeching you would expect of like a corvids. But in any case, what happened when the researchers actually tested out these tracking devices on Australian magpies? So at first, it went well enough. They set up these feeding stations. The Australian magpies came and fed from them, and so researchers were able to capture a few individuals and attach these harnesses onto them. And then after that, things kind of went wrong because, well, first of all, the Australian magpies tried to get rid of these devices. And so that's not really a good sign of like the tracking devices are like changing the behavior of the animal, because you want to try to get as naturalistic a perspective as possible when you're doing these studies. You don't want like their behavior to be disrupted too much. And furthermore, is that they succeeded in getting rid of these devices, and the way that they got rid of these devices was surprising because they got rid of them with the help of other Australian magpies. So in some cases, within less than an hour of being fitted with these devices, these magpies they would kind of try and get rid of them themselves, but like other magpies would approach them and then help them with it. And so, in many cases, the researchers observed them succeeding in removing these tracking devices. And what they would do is that they would kind of peck or snap at the harness. When they managed to attack the weak point where it's supposed to be released by a magnet, the harnesses would drop off and successfully remove the tracking device from the birds that have been attached with them. So yeah, and then they saw that within less than an hour, at least one had been removed. Within a few hours, you know they they also observed some other instances of this happening, and then they revisited the site over a period of like several days. But I think on the second day they still saw a couple of birds that still had the tracking devices attached. But then after that, they never saw like any birds with the devices attached again. And even when they saw like the same individuals that had been attached, because they also fitted like these bands onto the legs of the birds to identify them, which ones they had been attached with the tracking devices. And yeah, every time they saw a bird that had originally been tagged, the tracking device was gone, so they had succeeded in removing them. And so yeah, that was a bust. At least at least you can't use these tracking devices on Australian magpies reliably because they are able to figure out how to remove them with the help of other individuals of their species. So this is really interesting for a number of reasons. So first of all, the researchers highlight that this is a very important reason that you need to do this kind of pilot study, this kind of testing, when you're developing new types of tracking devices. So you know whether or not they can actually work when you actually want to do like research with them. So obviously that is an important takeaway from this study. But also, this is a rare documented example of what is called rescue behavior in birds, because the Australian magpies that helped the tagged individuals were not those that had been tagged themselves. So they had never experienced like wearing this harness before. However, they kind of seemingly voluntarily came over and helped the other magpies remove these tracking devices. And so rescue behavior is basically behavior where a particular animal helps another animal that is in distress without any obvious direct benefit to itself. And this kind of behavior is very rarely observed in wild animals, and it's certainly very rarely observed in birds. I know the researchers mentioned that there is at least one previous example where people have seen these endangered reed warblers kind of help other members of their flock by removing a type of sticky kind of seed that was stuck in their feathers, and that can weigh them down, prevent them from flying. And that is something that has been previously reported before. But other than that, there aren't many examples of like actual rescue behavior in birds, where it's like an individual that is not in distress helping another one that is, and also directly rescuing them from like the predicament with no immediate benefit to themselves. Yeah, that's not really something that has been seen much in birds. So this is a very rare example of that, and they might not have been they might not have discovered this behavior if it weren't for them doing this testing study that they had originally planned to do. And furthermore, it also suggests something, it might shed light on something on the cognitive abilities of these Australian magpies. So it is still not clear, like exactly how the magpies were able to figure out how to remove the harnesses. Like, did they kind of just do trial and error, where they just kind of pecked it kind of randomly and then it just happened to work, or were they more methodical, like in terms of figuring out how to remove them? Like, we don't know. Like, that is something that would be worth investigating in the future. But certainly, considering the relatively few studies that have been done already on Australian magpies and their cognitive abilities, it wouldn't be far-fetched to suggest that there might be some relatively complex processes going on there. So yeah, rather unexpected behavior, and it's always kind of fun when you get this kind of research where you set out to try and figure one thing out, but then you discover something else completely unexpected that you weren't really looking for at all. And yeah, definitely, like I said earlier, always fun to find out more things about animal cognition, and even more fun when it's found out in a manner like this. But yeah, I guess they have to come up with a new type of tracking device if they want to study the movements of Australian magpies. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very beautiful example of mutual aid among animals.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's just amazing. Like the how you describe rescue behavior, like the birds helping each other without like obvious benefits for one versus the other. Um, that's just amazing, especially for yeah, like you said, birds that aren't generally included in sort of like cognitive studies or understood to have been very cognitively high in intelligence. Like crows and parrots are.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
that's particularly fascinating to me. Um, and I'm very glad to see the sort of the pilot trial
Hmm.
of these tracking devices. I've always been interested in the different tracking devices that people have used to study certain animals
Yeah.
because yeah, definitely some seem a lot more um, comfortable than others, if that
Right.
makes sense.
Yeah.
It's one thing to like stick a shark in the fin with a tracking device
Hmm.
where a shark doesn't really feel it all
Yeah.
that much versus say like something like this where
Yeah.
you're basically making like a backpack for a
Right.
bird. um, it would be weird like one day you're flying around and the next minute you got this thing on you.
Yeah.
It's like what was the scene from Happy Feet
Oh
that
yeah.
I
Right.
remember with it was the skua with
Hmm.
the band,
Right.
and then of course the lead penguin comes back with the friggin' radio collar
Yeah.
like a backpack.
Yeah.
You always gotta wonder like what the animals are thinking. Like, what is
Right.
this thing? um, that's just amazing. Yeah, I hope they're able to come up with a less inconvenient tracking device for
Mm.
these birds, especially if they want to actually do the research that they set out to do in the
Yeah.
first place. Because you were very right. That is a key element of scientific investigation. You're looking for one thing, then you end up in a completely different direction.
Hmm.
Um, I'm certainly very familiar with that in the history of science. That's really cool. It's a fascinating paper. Um, right. Well, unless there's anything else you wanted to add, we can move on to my second story.
Oh yeah. Let's do that.
All right. Cool. Um, so, my second section here concerns a really ambitious genetic study by Anthony Wilder Wones and colleagues that was actually announced in a preprint
Hmm.
during February 2021,
Hmm.
but has now been accepted by the journal Science for February 2022. So that's kind of nice. Um, one of the most amazing aspects of the recent genomics revolution is the fact that scientists are now in a position to uncover lost aspects of human history from the sequenced DNA of peoples past and present. We can highlight the origin of specific genetic signatures, we can trace probable routes of migration or population expansion,
Hmm.
we can uncover specific instances of admixture, and we can date these events with a fair degree of accuracy. Unfortunately, the scientific processes involved in discovering these phenomena are complicated and sometimes lead to errors if not examined carefully, especially when researchers try to combine multiple genetic data sets together. In some instances, the data itself is just so massive that there are technical challenges as well. Albert, you mentioned that when you described that giant mammalian phylogeny
Hmm.
during the December 2021 episode,
Hmm.
where the
Yep.
files were just enormous. So you can imagine the issues on the minds of Wones and colleagues when they wanted to understand the broad sweep of recent human evolution around the world and basically make, the largest family tree of humanity yet done. And their solution to this problem was to create a tree sequence, which is a massive phylogenetic map of genetic evolution that combines multiple gene trees and links them all together through lines of descent. So the team obtained the genomes of 3,601 people, representing 215 populations, through several available databanks, along with the ancient genomes of just 8 individuals, including a family of 4 belonging to the Central Asian pastoralists of the Indo-European Afanasyevo culture, as well as Neanderthals from Vendiha, Croatia, and a Denisovan from Siberia. And they were able to detect over 159,000 genetic variants within this group. Then they used algorithmic and statistical methods to combine the data. So they used software like Sinfer 0.2.0, which the name suggests infers tree sequences by combining different trees and uncovering the missing data between them to make a single multi-mutational model. Because incomplete lineage sorting is a thing. That's when specific genes have their own evolutionary histories independent of others within a genome, and that can skew results if you're just focusing on one particular gene. As well as the software SynDate, which again, self-explanatory, provides possible dates for the emergence of ancestral haplotypes. And this was checked against a sample size of 3,589 ancient DNA samples to help constrain the tree sequence and provide more dates for genetic splits and admixture between populations. And this is a similar method to what some biologists use
Hmm.
when they try to construct phylogenies. They'll
Hmm.
rely on fossil specimens to constrain the divergent states.
Yep. Hmm.
And then, taking a map of the world, the team took the specific coordinates of the genomic samples and then, and as well as the constraining ancient DNA samples, to create their estimations of geographic routes and origins for certain genes. And when all was said and done, Wones and colleagues had built a human phylogenetic tree sequence for 626,133 inferred ancestral haplotypes. So these being the collection of genes shared by a common ancestor that are then passed down through the generations, and around 27 million common ancestors overall,
Hmm.
which is amazing.
Yeah.
But it's not 100% foolproof, the authors do admit. But it's probably the best and most comprehensive data set that's been produced
Hmm.
so far. Yeah, quite literally the biggest family tree of humanity yet made. So, what sorts of information did they find? Well, as you can see on the right, the maps produced what are known as 2D histograms or density heat maps.
Hmm.
These plot all the data points across the surface of the Earth through time. And the brighter a region, the more dense the data points are, which reveal key areas of haplotype divergence. In the 840,000 year map at the bottom right, we're at the time right before the divergence of the Neanderthal Denisovan or Neandersovan lineage from that of Homo sapiens. And we find that even then, many of the genetic lineages seen in people today were branching out
Hmm.
across a region of northern and central Africa and into Southwest Asia. And this fits fairly well with the hypothesized routes of population expansion argued by the fossils and genetic data. But that's not to say that those lineages emerged right there. The ancient genomic samples only show so much from such a limited sample
Hmm.
size. And it will be important to obtain more data from other Neanderthals and other Denisovans and any other early human groups to further refine these models. Further in time, around 280,000 years ago, so the bottom left of the figure, we're within the time that Homo sapiens evolved in Africa, as revealed by the fossil data like Jebel Irhoud in Morocco
Hmm.
and Omo 1 in Ethiopia. The latter one, incidentally, has been redated recently to 233,000 years ago,
Hmm.
so it's far older than previously thought. And yet, we find that a lot of shared ancestry in living humans still extends far into southern Eurasia. Could this be providing hints of those earlier out of Africa expansions for sapiens that we begin to trace from Greece 210,000 years ago or the Levant 190,000 years ago? It's a good question.
Hmm.
But as before, this is probably not the full picture, and the lack of data for parts of Africa and Eurasia might be obscuring more lines of descent than are seen here. Then, at 140,000 years ago, the number of lineages spreads further across Africa, Eurasia, and finally into Oceania.
Hmm.
And here's where things get especially interesting. The histogram plots populations of early humans in Wallacea and New Guinea over 100,000 years earlier
Hmm.
than the archaeological record shows. It has been speculated by some paleoanthropologists, based on genetic data from this part of the world, that early humans like Denisovans might have crossed Wallace's line
Hmm.
and settled in New Guinea far earlier than the main out of Africa migration 60,000 years ago, which brought Homo sapiens into these regions for the first time. Could these be genetic signals of that crossing, possibly showing the probable dates for expansion? Maybe. The authors do stress that this might be an effect of the data,
Mm-hmm.
and what the signals are really showing are ancestral groups who did not necessarily live in this part of the world, but who gave rise to descendants that are now found only there.
Right.
Um, we've definitely seen the same effect on some of these maps where they're showing very early dates for the peopling of the Pacific Islands, which are way beyond what the archaeology shows,
Mm-hmm.
as well as the same effect may be at work in the map of 56,000 years ago, which is showing human populations in the Americas
Mm-hmm.
long before the general consensus. Now, I've already talked at length at this point about proposed archaeological sites for an earlier peopling of the Americas before 17,000 years ago, and my speculations about pre-sapiens hominins like Denisovans making that journey. So all I'll say is that should this signal turn out to be accurate, well, it only adds further kindle to the flames of those
Mm-hmm.
ideas, which would be really cool if
Yeah.
that's the
Mm.
case. And of course, the sheer spread of human ancestry from around this time definitely adds further confirmation of the scale of the main out of Africa expansion for Homo sapiens. And by the time you get to the 25 and 2.5 thousand years ago maps above, well, then our species grew to be very widespread indeed and shares common ancestors all over the place. So the main takeaways from this wonderful study
Mm.
are that the shared threads of human ancestry run deep, and our ancestors, whether they're sapiens, Neanderthal, or Denisovan, inhabited a wide spread of Africa and Eurasia and seem to have interacted closely with each other continuously over time. This has been speculated about for quite some time, even
Mm-hmm.
before the actual genetic information emerged that we interbred with other species. So to kind of see that corroborated in these histograms, however imperfectly, is just really cool.
Yeah.
So moving to the next slide, we're going to do something a little bit different for a change. Um, Wones has uploaded to YouTube
Hmm.
a time-lapse video of the various data points as they traverse the globe over a period of 2 million years. Of course, incorporating earlier ancestors of Neanderthals and Neanderthals, for example. Um, because of the need to restrict the data to this map alone, when we play it, you'll see that the expansions into the Americas are not exact.
Hmm.
So it'll look like people are hopping from Europe to North America, but what's actually happening is an over Beringia route.
Right.
So it's a little bit awkward. So let's go ahead and watch that
All right.
for a minute.
Let's see.
So of course this is starting in the present day and moving backwards in time. So as you watch, you'll see these points slowly coalesce together within a
Hmm.
region of about northeastern Africa. And of course, each one is color coded to show different regions of the world,
Hmm.
so very, very broad geographic regions. But yeah, you can really see a lot of these early dates
Yeah.
and going back further and further and just how much they coalesce with each other.
Yeah.
It's really incredible.
Wow.
Yeah, isn't that neat?
Yeah.
Um, it is hoped that this giant tree sequence will be added to over the coming years,
Mm-hmm.
and the data provided by it will be the source of many new genetic and archaeological studies.
Right.
If we're finding genetic traces of people in New Guinea like over 100,000 years earlier than we thought, well, then it only makes sense to actually go to those places and do some archaeological work and
Mm-hmm.
see
Mm.
if we can find anything, if
Yeah.
we can confirm this model, and it's not an artifact after all. Um, so, according to Anthony Wones and Yan Wang, incidentally,
Hmm.
who co-wrote with Richard Dawkins I think the second edition
Yeah.
of the Ancestor's Tale, which I know we've talked about on this show a couple
Mm-hmm.
times before, very influential for the two of us. Um, they wrote in an article by The Conversation, which was about this study, as we incorporate more genomes into our genealogy, we can make it even more comprehensive. We have the tools to create genealogies of not thousands, but millions of genomes. And it's not just useful for humans. Lots of biological research requires knowing how populations of individuals change through time and space. That can be done by creating these genetic genealogies, whether it be for domesticated animals, endangered species, or vectors of human disease, such as
Mm.
mosquitoes. So, who knows? Maybe sometime in the near future, we'll have the unified genealogy of dogs,
Yeah.
or horses, or elephants, or malaria,
Hmm.
which, yeah, that would be really neat to see. I know we've done all kinds of genomic studies on non-human animals and see how they've moved over time. But to kind of plug all that data together in one massive study, um, I think that would be really interesting,
Yeah.
especially if you could, because with a lot of these animals, their lineages will go further into deep time,
Right.
and so they'll probably have to incorporate continental movements
Mm.
depending on what organisms they use.
Yeah.
At which that'll probably be as cool looking as this video that we just showed you all.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, this has been like a fairly widely shared story, but I couldn't not talk
Oh
about it
yeah.
here because my interest in this subject, in the movements of our ancestors over time and how people got to different places, it's just amazing. And so to kind of see all that synthesized together in one convenient place,
Mm-hmm.
considering how much work has been done since the genomics revolution began, it's just mind-boggling to me. Um, this first decade of work has been very lucrative
Mm-hmm.
and opening human history even more. Yeah, what do you think, Albert?
Oh yeah. I mean, this just looks like an incredibly impressive study, um, and yeah, like wow, I definitely look forward to similar methods being applied to other species as well. But yeah, this is just really amazing for all the reasons that you mentioned. Um, and I mean, as far as like the kind of more unusual results, like the unusually unexpectedly early dates for some of the regions, yeah, I definitely agree that it would be reasonable to treat those results with some caution at the moment. I mean, as we have discussed before on the show, estimating the timing of events from kind of evolutionary or phylogenetic relationships can be pretty fraught. We mentioned this with birds, for example, timing the origin of birds, but so it very much could be at least partly an artifact of the data that was included. However, it's definitely intriguing. I mean, like you said, there are some hints out there from other sources of data that suggest that there might be some truth to those earlier dates, and so yeah, I look forward to kind of seeing how people get to the bottom of that. It seems amazing, and yeah, just an overall kind of incredible study. And yeah, the video was really cool too, and I'm glad that it actually worked and played properly on my end. So yeah, no, and I look forward to seeing future expansions of this for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you're definitely right. Um, One of the most important lessons that people have since learned about studying the genomes of people is that they change really quickly,
Hmm.
even just going back maybe 500, 1,000 years.
Yeah.
So, and like that can really change how the data is presented
Hmm.
because I remember very early on in the 80s when the very first genetic study that was done to try to understand human origins. So, like the famous mitochondrial Eve study, it was like 1981.
Hmm.
Um, they only relied on living peoples,
Hmm.
living mothers from around the world to do that study, and it was heavily panned because well, partially because there were concerns that by only using like a living human data set, there might be data missing because of the various movements in time and how like certain genes are lost and are coded differently over time.
Yeah.
And so what we're finding is when we include ancient DNA, ancient genomes into these studies, yeah, it does like in some cases widely change how the data is presented and the certain timing of these events and their geographic location. So I would definitely like to see more ancient genomes included into this study to help really refine things. And then maybe it'll be even more accurate, and maybe some of these artifacts will go away, maybe they'll be sustained. maybe there'll be even more surprises.
Mhm.
Um,
Yep. Mm.
yeah, definitely looking forward to the future of this for sure. But yeah, I do believe if there's nothing else to add, we have your final study, which is also a really incredible, fascinating piece of work.
Yeah, sure. All right. So, yeah, let's go on to the next slide. And right, so my next study, like my first, I kind of stuck to sort of my main field of interest for this episode and went with two stories about Maniraptor and dinosaurs, but that's okay. Obviously, we enjoy our favorite subjects for a reason. So, yeah, every now and then we're definitely gonna take notice of the studies that have to do with those subjects. And I thought this one was a really interesting one. Um, Now, of course, the particular Maniraptorans that are the focus of this study are not living birds. They are an extinct group of dinosaurs called the oviraptorosaurs, currently known mostly and probably, well, potentially only from the Cretaceous, although there are some dinosaurs from the Jurassic that have been suggested to be possible oviraptorosaurs. However, the best known taxa and the ones that we are pretty confident are actually oviraptorosaurs are all known from the Cretaceous so far. And now, if you know me, certainly if you followed our show long enough, you'll know that I like theropod dinosaurs a lot. Of course, Maniraptorids are a group of theropods, but I particularly like theropods that start doing like weird things that aren't like the typical theropod thing. Because theropod dinosaurs are, the classic, or at least they include like the classic meat-eating dinosaurs. Like pretty much all the large predatory dinosaurs are theropods. However, within theropods, a number of groups, especially within Maniraptorids, have gone on to do like very different types of things ecologically and functionally. And so one of these groups seemed to have been the oviraptorosaurs. Um, and the thing is, what oviraptorosaurs were actually doing has been really difficult to figure out. And that's because oviraptorosaurs, well, for one thing, they have very weirdly shaped skulls. And you can see on the figure here that these are the skulls of different types of oviraptorosaurs. Um, and yeah, a common story is that when oviraptorid skulls were first discovered, people had trouble figuring out which end was the front and which end was the back, and you might be able to see why. So obviously, as shown here on the slide, pointing towards the left, where the mouth is shown like opening, that's the front. But yeah, these are such oddly shaped skulls that it can be very difficult to tell like which end is the front and which end is the back, at least at a glance. And so they have these very odd kind of boxy short snouts and short skulls. And furthermore, many of them did not have any teeth. So that's something that also complicates the picture when it comes to trying to figure out what they were doing, what they were eating. You can't just look and see, oh, it's got sharp teeth, it's a carnivore, or it's got like relatively blunt teeth, it's a herbivore. They didn't have any teeth at all, so what were they doing? Well, in the toothless oviraptorosaurs, evidently the snout was at least partly covered by a beak of some sort, but it is still pretty tricky to figure out exactly what kind of food that they were processing with that beak. Now, we know that the earliest oviraptorosaurs did have teeth, and so they actually included one in the study here, and so that's the one on the very top. That's a species called, or rather genus called Incisivosaurus, and it's actually named after its teeth, so it's named after, it has like these enlarged teeth at the very front of its snout, the front of its upper jaw, which you can make out there, that are kind of enlarged, so they look like the incisors of a mammal. So it's called Incisivosaurus because of that. I remember when it was first discovered, there were a lot of news reports that gave it some very colorful descriptions, like it's Bugs Bunny crossed with Roadrunner because it's got like rabbit-like teeth, whereas it's because birds are maniraptorans, like their overall skeletal structure would have been very bird-like, especially it's very similar to like ground birds today. So yeah, that's not a terrible description, to be honest. So the very earliest oviraptorosaurs did have teeth, and those teeth they look they tend to have very few teeth, however. You can see, like, in Incisivosaurus, they're restricted to the tip of its upper jaw, so it's not like it's got a whole mouthful of teeth. It's got, like, a few teeth at the front. And they do look like the teeth of a herbivore. People have studied, like, the wear patterns on these teeth, like, what you eat kind of influences the type of wear pattern that your teeth get. And they do look like the wear patterns you would expect of a herbivorous animal. And their overall shape, too, does look more herbivore than carnivore. So it seems at least the very earliest oviraptorosaurs were primarily herbivorous. So that's quite different from, like, the standard theropod condition. However, with the toothless later oviraptorosaurs, it's it's pretty tricky. It's not obvious that they were herbivores or carnivores or both. We do have some evidence in the original specimen of Oviraptor that was first discovered. It was actually preserved with a lizard in its gut. So clearly they did eat meat some of the time, but how often they ate meat or like whether they also ate it in addition to plants and such, that's been much harder to figure out. Now, in general, the current consensus is that Oviraptorosaurs were probably not like exclusively carnivorous. At least it does seem like from the shape of their skull and their beak that they could have eaten plant material. At the very least, Uh, they weren't probably regularly hunting animals that were similar in size themselves, which like a lot of the classic sharp-toothed theropods probably were. So if they were hunting, they were probably hunting like much smaller animals, and it is quite plausible that they were eating plants on the side. So yeah, they're generally considered like one of these. For as a shorthand, they're often said to be like herbivorous theropods, but I guess a more accurate term would be non-hypercarnivorous theropods. So hypercarnivore is an animal that eats like primarily meat for its diet. Like most of its diet consists of meat, whereas it is quite plausible that Oviraptorosaurs were also eating plants, if not primarily plants. So yeah, nonetheless, it has been tricky based on their anatomy to figure out what they were doing. I guess just to give you some perspective, most Oviraptorosaurs were pretty small. Like the majority of Oviraptorosaurs are the size of a turkey or smaller than that. There are some that get bigger though. For example, the second one down, labeled letter B on this figure, that's Chiripari from the late Cretaceous of Mongolia. That one got to be around the size of a person or so. So yeah, it's within the size range of a human. So think somewhere between like 40 to 70 kilograms, something like that. So yeah, decently sized animal, and there were a few Oviraptorosaurs that got even bigger than that, and in some cases much bigger than that. The largest ones that we know of probably weighed over a ton, and so the biggest one that has been named so far is the aptly named Gigantoraptor from the late Cretaceous of China, and yeah, that's a massive animal. That's 7 to 8 meters long and 1.5 tons or somewhere within that range. So yeah, gigantic theropod. Not one of the absolute biggest theropods, but definitely very big for a Maniraptoran dinosaur, and certainly very big for an Oviraptorosaur. And yeah, so huge size range, but in all cases, or at least in the toothless species, it is very difficult to figure out what they were doing ecologically. And these are members of like the specific Maniraptoran group called a Peniraptora, which is the group that's where we see like good evidence of like complex feathers covering their forelimbs. So they would have essentially had wings, basically. Like they had these very long, broad feathers going down their arms and their hands. Now, there isn't much evidence that any of the Oviraptorosaurs could fly, so potentially these feathers were used for other functions, like display is a pretty good bet. However, there's probably another important function for them too, and this actually relates to some of the early attempts to kind of hypothesize what Oviraptorosaurs were doing, because the name Oviraptor means egg thief, and if you're familiar with this group of dinosaurs, you know the story behind this, but kind of in brief, is that the original specimen of Oviraptor was discovered kind of sitting on a nest of eggs. And so the original kind of speculation to explain this was that, so this was a dinosaur that was eating the eggs of other dinosaurs, and so that's why it was called oviraptor for that reason. And it was suggested that, yeah, they were going after eggs. And that particular specimen had been, killed while in the midst of engaging in this kind of behavior. And certainly it is true that these kind of rather short, boxy skulls seem like they would have been pretty good at crushing things, so it is not far-fetched to suggest that they would have eaten eggs on occasion. However, it turns out that the original reason to suggest that they were feeding on eggs was incorrect. It was flawed, because later studies that also found additional specimens of oviraptorosaurs sitting on top of nests of eggs. Like these specimens, oftentimes the eggs preserved embryos inside, and those embryos were not the embryos of other types of dinosaurs, but of oviraptorosaurs. And so it turns out that it is much more likely that these specimens that were found on top of their nests were not like in the middle of eating the eggs, but instead they were kind of sitting on top of the nest to protect and potentially incubate the eggs, much like a bird today would sit on top of its nest. The original hypothesis turned out to be incorrect, but that certainly taught us a lot about the biology of these dinosaurs, that they already shared a lot of these reproductive behaviors with modern birds. And certainly, yeah, these would have been very bird-like dinosaurs, and they were relatively closely related to birds as well. But even so, we know quite a bit about oviraptorosaur reproduction, because we have all these specimens of these dinosaurs sitting on their nests, and we've studied those eggs and studied those babies. And so, yeah, quite a lot about that is known, but that doesn't really get us much closer to understanding what they actually ate. So other than that one lizard found in the original specimen of Oviraptor, we don't have much direct evidence of what they were eating. So this study decided to at least try and get us closer to the answer. And so what they did was they wanted to study the skull musculature, or these jaw musculature of oviraptorosaurs, and also their bite forces. So this is quite interesting. So as I mentioned, these short boxy skulls, they look like they would have been capable of a pretty strong bite. However, up until now, no one had really done the testing to actually estimate how hard they could bite. It was just like, okay, it looks like it's good for crushing, but how good was it? Well, let's find out. And so this study, what they did was that they took CT scans of well-preserved skulls of various oviraptorosaur species, including that early oviraptorosaur in Sisyphosaurus, and 3 oviraptorids, which are one of the groups of the toothless oviraptorosaurs. Some of which have very well preserved skulls. So they have from top to bottom, I think Chiribati, Khan. I think people always have to make a Star Trek reference when they speak of the oviraptorid Khan. And also the one on the bottom, I believe, is a Conchoraptor, which means a shellfish thief, which is another idea that's been floated, because they're like, they got these strong jaws, so maybe they could have eaten clams or snails or things like that, which is plausible, but there isn't really a direct evidence for that. So in any case, they took CT scans of these skulls, allowing them to work with these skulls on a computer. And we've mentioned before about how useful CT scanning has been to paleontology, because we can do studies like this where we don't necessarily have to take the physical and potentially very fragile specimen and study it in detail, and we can also rotate these models around in the computer and see all these little details we might not otherwise find it very difficult to see. And so what they did was, once they had these scanned skulls, they reconstructed where the jaw muscles would attach on the skull. And so that's what you're seeing with the lines there. Now, the lines there are not representing the actual original size of the muscles in this figure. So those are just marking where the muscles actually are. They're in the actual animal, they wouldn't have been these thin strings of muscle. They would have been much thicker, as you might imagine. But in any case, they reconstructed where the muscles would go. So part of this process would be identifying muscle attachments in the skull, and we can do that because muscle attachments often leave distinctive textures or like ridges or bumps on the skull, so you can infer where the muscles would go. And also we can look at living relatives of oviraptorosaurs to infer what muscles they would have had and where those muscles would have attached. So of course you can look at living birds, which are also penoraptoran dinosaurs, and you can look at living crocodilians, which are the closest living relatives of dinosaurs without being dinosaurs themselves. And so they did all of that and reconstructed where the muscles go on the skull and potentially how big the muscles were. All right. So once they had all of that, they were then able to calculate, how much force these muscles could exert, and furthermore, like how much force, like in different parts of the jaw, the muscles could exert. And what they found was that overall, they were able to confirm that oviraptorosaurs had pretty strong bites for their body size. And especially when compared to other types of non-hypercarnivorous theropods, they had extremely strong bites. So they also compared them to two other groups of theropods that don't seem to have been like large predators, at least predators eating large animals. So these were the ornithomimosaurs, which we've talked about on the show before. They're sort of ostrich-like group. But they kind of convergently evolved the body plan of ostriches. They're not like especially close to modern birds. They're actually more distantly related to birds than the oviraptorosaurs were. And also another group called the therizinosaurs. This is another group of maniraptoran dinosaur, but more distant to birds than oviraptorosaurs. And they are a very weird group. They have like these massive claws on their hands. They had the longest claws known of any animal. The largest ones had claws that were like about a meter long. So yeah, incredibly weird animals. However, despite those fearsome claws, we have done previous studies on like the bite forces of therizinosaurs before, and they had like relatively small heads for their body size, so you would expect that they did not have particularly strong bites, and that is indeed what previous studies have found. Ornithomimosaurs too, like you can imagine, an ostrich-like body plan, they also had pretty small heads too, and so they also didn't have very strong bites for their body size. Oviraptorosaurs, on the other hand, did. And it turns out that oviraptorosaurs, at least based on results of this study, they could bite like as hard as, or in some cases even harder than ornithomimosaurs and therizinosaurs that were over 200 times their size. So yeah, that is pretty impressive. Like even considering that obviously ornithomimosaurs and therizinosaurs had relatively weak bites for their body size. Body size actually matters a lot when it comes to bite force. Like I took a biomechanics course when I was doing my master's at the University of Bristol, and they had us do like various exercises related to like calculating or doing calculations for like biomechanics studies, including bite force. And one of the exercises we did was that we kind of essentially calculated the bite force of an alligator versus a gharial. A gharial is another type of crocodilian, but it's a very long and slender snout. And so at equal body sizes, an alligator would have a much stronger bite than a gharial. However, in the particular exercise that we did, the gharial actually had a stronger bite than the alligator, and the reason for this was because the particular specimens that were used for the exercise, the gharial was a much larger individual than the alligator individual, and so even though biomechanically its skull is less well adapted to exerting strong bites, it was still able to bite harder than that particular alligator individual. So yeah, I mean, being able to bite as hard as something as a similar kind of dinosaur that's over 200 times your mass is pretty impressive. So yeah, all the oviraptorosaurs had relatively strong bites, but the oviraptorids, like the toothless ones especially, did. Yeah, that was quite impressive. Chiripati, particularly the one that's bigger than the other ones, it definitely had like much stronger bites than the ornithomimosaurs and therizinosaurs that were used for comparison in this study. So yeah. In fact, I actually went and looked this up in preparation for the episode. The oviraptorosaur bite forces were comparable, I would say, to bite forces that have been measured of modern carnivorous mammals that are of similar size. In some cases, like the mammals had like slightly stronger bites, perhaps, but yeah, roughly in the same range. And I mean, mammals have like pretty wicked bites in general. So like being able to match up to a mammal bite is often quite an accomplishment. So yeah, like these dinosaurs were definitely using their jaws to like do some pretty heavy duty processing of some sort. Now, in addition to measuring bite force, this study also was able to study how wide these dinosaurs could open their mouth, so their gape size, basically. And this has been done on some other types of extinct theropods previously, including both carnivorous and herbivorous types. And so they found that oviraptorosaurs, relatively speaking, had limited gapes. So you can see that here. And that's actually what the figure here is supposed to be showing. Because we know, essentially muscles can only stretch to a certain length before, they get injured. So you can basically, depending on how long you estimate the muscles to be, you can see how long they can stretch, and from there estimate how wide these animals can open their mouth. And so that's what's actually being done here. And on the side, those graphs are showing like the different muscles and the strain that they're experiencing. And so they basically on the digital model, they just kind of open the jaws until it seems like the muscles cannot stretch anymore without injuring themselves, and from there estimate the size of the gape of the dinosaurs. And so in this case, it turns out that oviraptorosaurs can only open their jaws up to like between 40 to 50 degrees. And in the oviraptorids, they are a bit more restricted than in the early oviraptorosaurs, like incisivosaurs. And that is consistent with other types of non-hypercarnivorous theropods. So therizinosaurs, for example, this type of study has been done on them, and they also had relatively small gapes within a similar range to what was found for the oviraptorosaurs here. Whereas like carnivorous theropods such as Allosaurus and Tyrannosaurus, they could open their jaws like much wider, like 60 degrees or more. So yeah, in that regard, oviraptorosaurs had much stronger bites than other non-hypercarnivorous theropods, but similar gape size. And so what does this mean? Well, of course, this information does not directly tell us what oviraptorosaurs were actually eating, but it does give us some possibilities that we can think about. So certainly they had stronger bites than other herbivorous theropods. So perhaps they were specializing in feeding on like tough plant parts, like maybe hard fruits, hard nuts, maybe tough stems and things like that. That the other types of non-hypercarnivorous theropods perhaps were not eating as often or could not eat because they were too tough. And another possibility is that perhaps oviraptorosaurs were able to supplement the diet with small animals because of their strong bite, because having the strong bite, of course, would have allowed them to restrain and probably kill small animals pretty effectively, and so that certainly could be a possibility. Of course, we do in fact have direct evidence that Oviraptor was at least occasionally eating small animals. However, that being said, because of the limited gape size in these dinosaurs, the size of the prey item would have been limited by that. So they probably couldn't have gone after things that they couldn't fit into their jaws easily, at least not very often. So yeah, they would have been limited to relatively small types of animals that would fit in their mouth. However, that probably would have allowed them to carve out a pretty distinctive niche in their ecosystem. And of course, there is some variation between like the bite forces and the jaw mechanics of these different species of oviraptorids. And in some cases, we know that there were multiple species potentially living in the same environment. So perhaps further studies will show that they might have specialized for different types of feeding behavior within like these general possibilities. So yeah, I certainly look forward to more research about that. And I'm glad that people finally decided to do this study and put some numbers on just how hard these dinosaurs could bite, because there have been a lot of studies done on like carnivorous theropods, like Tyrannosaurus and Allosaurus especially, their feeding mechanics and how hard they could bite and how they were feeding and killing their prey. But there has been a lot less attention being given to other types of dinosaurs, for perhaps obvious reasons. And so, yeah, it is quite good to see a study like this on such a bizarre group of theropods and such a mysterious group as well. So, yeah, I was very glad to see this study, and I think they found some pretty cool results. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I just love biomechanics studies in
Oh, yeah,
general. So when they do them with fossil
you're
animals, it's
right.
just a neat opportunity to like gain some like insights into behavior
Hmm.
that I mean we otherwise probably wouldn't get
Right,
by any other means. Um, Especially for such weird dinosaurs
right.
too. Yeah, oviraptorosaurs are always a bit of an enigma for me.
Hmm.
Um, of course, like I knew early on about the whole mishap in identification,
Right.
of these things being egg eaters, and they kind of got stuck with this name. Um, what it is kind of weird, like in general, that happened to begin with. You find an animal over a nest, and your first thought is, "Oh, this thing is trying to steal
You're
from the
right.
nest."
Yeah.
Um, but I guess I mean they were because that was Roy Chapman Andrews, right?
Yeah.
The
Who
Mongolian
discovered?
expedition, and
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, they were finding a lot of protoceratops, and so I guess if they weren't finding a lot of oviraptors,
Right.
I guess I can understand how that mistake would have been made.
Yeah.
Um, of course, again, like it'd be a while before we actually like were able to find eggs with embryos inside.
You're
Like, oh
right.
wait, this is the same species as this
Yeah.
one. Um, but that in itself, like those are probably some of my favorite dinosaur fossils. The ones with the oviraptorosaurs over the nests,
Hmm.
like with the arms splayed out
Yep.
guarding the eggs. Like that's such a poignant image.
Right.
Like it's the mother protecting the babies or the father.
Or the father. Yeah.
Um, yeah, because like I know that that's been discussed.
Mm-hmm.
The
Yep.
what is it called? When the dad takes over.
Paternal
When,
care.
when, oh yeah, sure, okay, paternal care. I thought it was a different word. Yeah, like I know that's been discussed, but yeah, like just guarding the eggs, and then from like whatever ended up killing the animals in the end.
Right.
Do we know anything about that? Like, I know like the common thing that I hear is like a sandstorm
Right,
blew
yeah,
over.
yeah. It's generally thought to be like a sandstorm of a dune collapse, which is pretty plausible because those nesting oviraptorosaurs were like in a desert. And yeah, plus I guess just as an aside, because I don't think I mentioned this earlier, yeah, the kind of nesting behavior is probably one of the other functions of their feathers, because they had these large feathers on their forelimbs to like kind of cover over the eggs while they were performing this behavior. But yeah, yeah. In any case, yes, I think it's generally thought that still thought that a dune collapse or sandstorm probably buried most of them.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a very good point as well. I mean, that's like indirect evidence of feathers,
Right.
because like if these animals didn't have feathers, then, like what they're gonna kind of like
Yeah.
huddle over their nests awkwardly.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
Real talk, I had a biology textbook in
Hmm.
college, and they had an image showing this nesting behavior,
Yeah.
but it was like a completely naked oviraptor over the
Right.
nest. And I remember being the most awkward thing possible. Like, why would you draw it like that?
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, it was a biology textbook, it wasn't a
Right.
paleontology
Right.
textbook, so I guess that there's maybe miscommunication there,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, which happens. But no, so yeah, like growing up, these animals, like even though I knew like they weren't like the egg stealers
Hmm.
of popular culture, like that image has just lasted to the point where they even like confuse animals together. Like I know ornithomimosaurs
Hmm.
were often shown as like egg stealers,
Yes.
and
Right.
like they would interchange like the names of the two groups as well,
Oh
which
yeah.
would be confusing. But yeah, no, completely different animals. Um, but yeah, that's really fascinating. So I guess like having a strong bite force to feed on, I guess, generally tougher foods kind of makes sense with like what is going on with their heads.
Right.
I
Yeah.
mean, like that palatial tooth,
Hmm.
it's just strange to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
It seems like it's there well, of course, like, there are no organs that are like there for specific things. Like it can be multi-purpose. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
like it seems like it's there to pierce something,
Right. Right.
but it's like, what is that
What is it?
thing?
Yeah. Yeah.
'Cause, I've certainly seen plenty of paleo art, them going after clams
Mm-hmm.
and crabs.
Yep.
Um, yeah, I guess eggs as
Yep.
well. People people try to be exceptional, like yeah, like these weren't like the egg stealers of old, but they could have probably still
Yeah.
had some eggs
Right.
too.
Right.
I mean, nutritious food source. I mean, if
Mm-hmm.
you're hungry and it's there,
Oh yeah.
I don't see why not, right?
Right. Right.
Um, but like yeah, turtles, hard nuts and seeds. I guess that is a question. Like what do we know about like the botany of these regions where these animals were found? Like,
Yeah.
have we found any like seed-bearing plants that could provide potential sources of food to these
Right.
animals?
That's a good question, and they do mention it a little bit in the paper. And the unfortunate news is that in most of the you know localities where we have a lot of good oviraptorid fossils, um, they aren't good places to preserve plant fossils. So the answer to that is we know very little, and yeah, that is very unfortunate because otherwise we could speculate a bit more and kind of try and figure out perhaps which particular plants they might have been feeding on. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. Well, yeah, I hope we're able to get lucky at some point. But in either case, like this is a good start. To me, like yeah, like not only you have the bite force, you have the gait. Um, and yeah, it's kind of it makes a little bit of sense to me seeing
Mm-hmm.
like the gait limits for these animals.
Yeah.
It generally fits with what I've seen with these skulls. Which yeah, like they are just very weird.
Oh yeah.
Like that lower jaw, like what the hell is going on
Right.
there?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. It's really deep, and yeah. There definitely aren't a lot of good like modern analogs to this kind of skull. Like there are some like things with vague similarities. Like certainly in the paper is brought up parrots, for example, are like the
Yeah.
premier example of like birds that crush hard things with their beaks, and they do have some similarities to oviraptorosaurs, but even then it's not quite the same. And because parrots are so much smaller than oviraptorosaurs in general, it is very hard to like just say that they were doing similar things or such because the scale involved is quite different. Yeah, very odd. And you mentioned like the kind of palatal tooth earlier. I mentioned that these oviraptorids were toothless. It is technically true that they are toothless because that projection is not a true tooth. It's more like a projection, a sharp projection that comes off the roof of the mouth. But it is tooth-like. So yeah, and probably it was like doing some kind of important role in feeding. But yeah, probably definitely it seems plausible it was involved in breaking something open. But yeah, what exactly? Well, I guess we have yet to find out.
Right. And that's a very good point about the parrots too. Even though like parrots kind of have a different situation going on too, because like their upper beak
Right.
can move
That's right. Yeah.
independent of the lower one, and
Exactly.
as I understand it, these animals weren't
No.
doing that. Um, I often wonder too, like what sorts of keratin sheaths
Right.
are we missing
Yep.
from these animals? Like would the beak would probably have been at least a little bit longer
Right.
than what we see here. It's just finding evidence of that if that's the case.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly. That's
that can really radically change how an animal looks.
yes.
Um,
Absolutely.
'Cause I'm just thinking about the Edmontosaurus
Hmm.
and the hadrosaurs, like those types of
Yeah.
dinosaurs,
Yeah.
where we're so used to seeing the duck bill because like the beak sheath is usually removed or has not been preserved.
Right.
And when you include that in there, like it's not a duck,
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
Right.
it's it's a gosh, how do I even describe it?
Yeah. It's more like a vacuum cleaner.
Yeah.
The shape that is not the function, but the shape. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that would be funny.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's very fitting. Yeah, because like I mean, for me, oviraptorosaurs, like they look more like something I'd buy at Office Max than an actual animal in
Yeah.
life today.
Right. Oh,
Is,
that is funny, but Yeah, I mean the size of the beak sheath that's definitely something that paleo artists have thought about quite a bit because like one of the big questions is like not just like how far forward the beak extended, but how far back because you can see that a lot of these oviraptoroids they have like this kind of crest on over their nose, and sometimes the rest of their skull as well, and it, like the question is like did the beak sheath like extend up to the crest? Was the crest also like covered in like a continuous like keratin sheath along with the beak, or was that something else? And yeah, I think that's something that is still kind of unresolved. And I know some people have pointed out that it seems like the texture on the crest might not have supported a keratin sheath, and so
Hmm.
even though that is a very common way to depict them in paleo art, some people have also experimented with like other interpretations as well, where like the covering of the crest is soft instead, which is very interesting. And yeah, I definitely think that that's something that's worth looking into as well.
That's so cool. I didn't know about that.
Mm,
Gosh, wow. Because yeah, the image in my head is
right.
generally of like the continuous sheath, but
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, like maybe having them have combs
Right.
or weird filaments or some other
Hmm.
kind of cartilage.
Right.
Um, Gosh, just more fun mysteries, I guess,
Oh yeah.
regarding these animals. But yeah, I guess just to kind of close out, I definitely am pleased to see this study and
Hmm.
like this is like another a little step forward
Yeah.
to like truly understanding these dinosaurs as weird as they are.
Right.
And I hope to see more of it in the near future with other groups as well.
Totally.
Oh, fantastic. Well, if there's nothing else you'd like to add, I guess this is it for
Yeah.
our episode.
Mhm.
We appreciate you all joining us very much. If we move to the next slide. So, I know we've been teasing this interview for a couple months
Mhm.
now, but I think I'm confident in saying, because I've gotten in contact with Trey,
Mhm.
that we might possibly have a date finally. He's been doing school stuff. He's still
Yeah.
been busy. Um, there's a high probability that barring any sudden instances, because that's always a possibility,
Hmm.
um, we might be recording this next weekend,
Yeah. Mm.
and so we might be seeing this very soon, and we're all very excited about it.
Yep.
So again, as we've said many times before, if you have any questions at all you'd like to ask Miles or Trey or the two of them together, please don't hesitate to send them in. You can email us, you can put it in the YouTube comment section, you can text us on Twitter, and we will try to do our best to incorporate them into the general discussion.
Mm.
So we definitely have that to look forward to, and who knows if it all works out, this will be the next episode
Yeah.
of Through Time and Clades. So
And I might
just
add that if you are a patron, if you support us on Patreon, we will do our best to prioritize your questions for the interview. So, yeah, I mean, anyone can send us questions, but we are going to prioritize the ones we get from the patrons. So, yes, just a hint, hint, wink, wink there.
oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. And speaking of Patreon, yeah, that is a thing that we do. We are on Patreon. Um, You can go to patreon.com/timingclades. And if you so choose, you are more than welcome to support us on there through monetary donations. Of course, your contributions will help us continue the series and develop new projects and expansions like we've been doing. And we've been getting a lot of really wonderful support lately, so we appreciate it very much from our good friends Denver and Ilari and my sister Julie, as well as our other patron Paul, who we want to give a little shout out to.
Mhm.
Paul revealed some very intimate information about himself and his life that he wanted to ask us about, regarding his questions on neurodivergence in paleoanthropology.
Mhm.
And, it's something that I'm not well versed in. And it was a really wonderful opportunity to be able to hear from him and then go and do research on that subject,
Mhm.
which, yes, there has been a couple of studies that have been done on neurodivergence in regarding human evolution, and it's very surprising and very fascinating information. And so we just wanted to thank Paul again for thinking of us and sharing his story with us. And
Yeah.
thank you for your support as well, Paul. And we hope you have great days ahead of you. For
Absolutely.
sure. And so, yeah, we also like to do our general acknowledgments. So, of course, our good friends Henry and Alicia, we want to thank them for their contributions to the series. Henry, of course, again, he's behind our wonderful theme music that
Mm-hmm.
opens up each episode. And of course, we again like to remind everyone to go check out his blog, Those with Pycnofibers. So it's zinchangopteryx.wordpress.com to go check out his brand new post about future plate tectonics, as well as other posts as well, because
Mm-hmm.
he has a lot of fascinating things to
Oh
share.
yeah, always interesting.
Yeah, and of course, Alicia is responsible for the color scheme of Albert's oviraptorosaur avatar, which is a very lovely color scheme. And as always, we are on Twitter. We are at Time and Clades, where we generally post updates about upcoming episodes as well as other fun things that we seem to want to share. But most likely, you're watching us on YouTube on our page through Time and Clay. So if you're interested in liking and subscribing and getting notifications for future episodes, we appreciate that absolutely. Again, our subscriber count is growing pretty well, and we
Mm-hmm.
are grateful for every viewership and productive comment that comes our way. And of course, like again, like not just for the interview, if you have any questions at all
Mm-hmm.
about the show or about us or the subjects in this episode or in other episodes past or whatever, feel free to send them in.
Yep.
Our email is timeandclates@gmail.com. And as always, of course, you can put them on the YouTube comment section as well as our Twitter. And as always, the stories that we cover on these news episodes are referenced in the description, where we have links to the respective papers if you want to go into the nitty gritty details of everything that we've talked about, as well as among other things. And yeah, with that, that is our episode. Again, the next episode coming up will most likely 90% ish be our very first interview.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's the case, we are very excited and we look forward to seeing you all there
Yep.
for that. But otherwise, we hope you all have a wonderful day. Stay safe, take care of each other, and we'll see you all next time.
Yeah, definitely. Later, everybody.